Welcome to Straight to the Point. I'm your host, Representative Joe Diorsi. In a world of long-windedness, I'm here to deliver you the Capitol News in 10 minutes or less. So, let's get straight to the point.
Welcome to the Straight to the Point podcast. This is Representative Joe Diorsi. And I have a special guest phoning in from Butler County today. She is the 12th District's own State Representative Stephenia Scialabba. Stephenie, thanks for joining.
Happy to be here, Joe.
So we've had some big news hitting us here in the Capital region for some time. Obviously, as we were discussing offline, we have the situation with the Senate race and the Bucks County Commissioners. We're not going to go there today. But just before that, in big news, just the other week, was a monumental, I would call it, court case. And you happened to be a participant on this court case, and it was a major win, not just for you and the law firm involved, but it was a major win for school districts and children across the Commonwealth. But before we go there, I just want to highlight you have not been a stranger, nor have you been new to challenging the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Just a couple months ago, you, myself, and Representative Barb Gleim of Cumberland were involved in standard changes. In fact, 6 of the 8 standards changes that we proposed were accepted. Now, that's still, I guess, in limbo, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak on that and your work, especially in the social emotional learning curriculum standard space.
Yeah, so education has been one of the real focus areas of my tenure so far with the House of Representatives. And Pennsylvania is kind of unique in the sense of we have an actual education clause in our Constitution that requires that the state provide a thorough and efficient public education system with meaningful opportunity to succeed academically, socially, and civically. Unfortunately, what we've seen happen is sort of a misunderstanding in the best case scenario, and just outright abuse in the worst case scenario of that clause. And what we've seen happening is under the guise of, there's different terms. There's CRT, critical race theory. There's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, note, it's not equality, it's equity. Mm-hmm. Then we see the SEL stuff, social emotional learning, and we see most recently the CRSE standards, culturally relevant, sustaining education standards. We saw the program standards that you and Barb and I worked on. And all of this has the same undercurrent of ideology being infused into education. So you're depriving students of that thorough and efficient education system. You're depriving them of the meaningful opportunity to succeed, all other things being equal. We've sort of lost focus of facts, and we're starting to get into ideology.
Yeah, definitely. And that let's move straight on here to the court case. I mean, this was pretty big news. You were part of a group that filed suit in 2023 against these curriculum guidelines from PDE that addressed this CRSE, culturally relevant and sustaining education. We've covered some of these acronyms. Are they all generally the same? Are they shifting goalposts? What is CRSE for our listeners?
They're all pretty much the same. So it's, it's the same tenets, the same philosophies, the same agenda couched in different terms and sometimes viewed or relayed to the public in these sort of unassailable concepts where you think, well, it reminds me of the anti-bullying stuff. How could any parent object to anti-bullying measures in school? Well, whenever you dig into it and you see that they're being used to provide a gender unicorn in kindergarten, then you start to see, what we're fighting against and how easy it is to mislead the public about what you're actually doing. So we've been really watching, what's coming through the Department of Education. And unfortunately, so much of what's being pushed through schools and pushed onto schools, whether they agree with it, whether they want to comply or not, it's outside of the regulatory process. It's outside of the legislative process. A lot of this is, quote, guidance, right? But their funding, the school's funding, for instance, with the CRSE standards, they were going to lose funding if they failed to incorporate and adopt these culturally relevant and sustaining education competencies. There's 9 competencies in them. And the first one is reflecting on one's cultural lens, where you are required to engage, and I'm reading directly from it, engage in critical and difficult conversations with others to deepen awareness of your own conscious and unconscious bias. Then the second one is you need to know and acknowledge that biases exist in the education system. You need to disrupt harmful practices, policies, and norms by rewriting policies, changing practices, and raising awareness. You need to then you get into competency 3, where you have to challenge your own belief, your own attitudes, your own assumptions, and your own behaviors. This is flying in the face of the First Amendment.
Yeah, and a lot of those phrases to me, and I'm sure you would agree, don't even make sense. It sounds like a Columbia University graduate course on how to not educate someone.
Right.
But,
I mean, what does this have to do with it? Competency number 9? You need to educate yourself about microaggressions and their impact on diverse learners, educators, and families, and actively disrupt the practice by naming and challenging its use. You must believe that microaggressions are real and take steps to educate yourself about the subtle and obvious ways in which you are invalidating the existence of others.
Yeah.
We're already in a teacher shortage in Pennsylvania. And not only are we failing to recruit some people or holding them hostage, holding their beliefs and their First Amendment rights hostage in order to get a degree. In our schools, everyone wants to rally and say, we're not giving them enough money. Not everybody, but that's the cry of the left a lot of times. You're not giving the public schools enough money. Now, never mind the fact that we're one of the highest per capita investments in the entire country for students in education funding and public education. But they want to say that, and then at the same time, they threaten to cut funding, withhold teacher certifications, whether they're current and they're up for a renewal through their service hours or in continuing education requirements, or they fail and refuse to provide a degree in the first place unless you go along with these ideological principles.
Yeah. So you and the group that you were working with filed a lawsuit challenging these guidelines, and I think there were some of your local school districts included in the suit.
Yes.
What was the court's decision, and what was the result that was kind of this big news thing that we were all celebrating the other week?
Well, what's great is that it wasn't a court's decision. So we filed. I am of counsel with the law firm Dillon McCandless and King, Coulter and Graham, and they're based here in Butler County, but they do Commonwealth-wide work, especially for schools and municipal work. So Mars School District, Laurel, and Penncrest, all in Western Pennsylvania. Mars is one of my school districts in my legislative district. Refused to comply. They did not agree with these competencies, and they thought they were unconstitutional. We like to think the same thing. So we challenged it in court. We sued the Department of Education, and we actually mediated this as a long mediation, but the department agreed and recognized that these were not going to withstand a legal challenge, and they officially rescinded them. So they sent an email to all of the local education agencies on the 15th of November, formally and officially rescinding these standards. But Joe, you mentioned earlier about, is CRT the same as this, just under a different name? And the answer is yes. And unfortunately, that's something that we need to be very aware of and keep our eyes out for, because they've replaced it with the Common Ground framework, which focuses on cultural awareness, trauma-aware, mental health, wellness, and technological and virtual engagement. Now, they were careful to say that only applies to educator preparation programs, where we're going to have to sort of counter that. I think that needs to be a new focus going into next session in the teacher pipeline, and making sure that we are respecting the First Amendment rights of our student teachers and people who wish to become teachers. And so we need to focus on that. But they have acknowledged that is not required for a school's professional development anymore.
So, so in plain English, I mean, these guidelines in the first place, they're gone as it relates to CRSE. However, the risk that you outlined, that I'm also aware of, we're members of the House Education Committee. The risk is, PDE, should they have the initiative and the prowess, let's call it, to do this, they could just shift this kind of material into a different program and submit that?
Yes.
Okay. So we do have to keep our eyes and ears open. So,
right. And now they're calling it, here's another term, another new euphemism. Now, instead of CRSE, now it's Common Ground.
Right. So, lightning round question for you here. We've covered this kind of, but I wanted to give you another opportunity to speak to the nature of this win. Why is this Even in precedent, Stephenie, and that word should mean a lot to you as a lawyer. Even in precedent, we said we have to keep our eyes open for these shifting goalposts. But why is this such a major win for Pennsylvania school districts and families?
Well, I think it's a nice bookend on what we just saw, in terms of mandate coming from the people and hearing the voice of the people. So I like to think that conservatives are the party of parents, and I think that parents are very tired of being excluded. We've seen streamlined and effective initiatives over the last 2 years, Joe, especially you and me on the Education Committee. We've seen attempts to exclude parents from walking their kid into the school, not letting them know what's on the curriculum, right? Our Parents' Bill of Rights has not seen the light of day, and I'm hoping that maybe now things will change going forward. So every win that we get is another brick in the wall and sort of another paver in the path to getting parents back in control of their children's lives and futures in education.
Yeah, that's great stuff. She is Stephenia Scialabba. She represents the 12th District. Legislative district, that is, in Butler County. She's a skilled lawyer by trade and a very effective representative as well. So, Stephenie, thanks for joining Straight to the Point.
This has been Straight to the Point. Visit repjod.com/mypodcasts.